Troy va a hablar al micrófono y yo voy a traducir instantáneamente, pero va a ser de viva voz. Entonces, no sé si con ese tono de voz se alcanza a escuchar. Okay. Antes que nada, me gustaría también dar un agradecimiento público a la Escuela de Arquitectura de la Universidad de Rice por el apoyo para hacer posible que Troy estuviera aquí. Y agradecerle a Troy también el apoyo y disposición de estar aquí con nosotros.
Gracias, David. Buenos dias. Thank you for having me here. It's very exciting to be in San Luis Potosí. I've heard so much about it from David, and I thank the faculty and students for hosting me in this, and on what's such a auspicious day with Chantolo. So very exciting for me to be here. Thank you. Ideas that frame my research, which is grounded in the space between design practice and the academy. Much of the design work is done in collaboration with my partner in my firm. My partner is Rosalind Schaum. My work broadly engages in exploring techniques that can better understand form and representation in the context of the city. This is an experiment. We've never done this together before, so if we do it well, we'll go on the road. Okay. So I'm going to tell you about the development of a CI practice. Many of the projects are competitions that we've actually lost. Many of the projects required compromise and negotiation and confrontation with issues that are outside of our control as architecture got built. I was asked to address in this lecture by your faculty lessons in architecture practice for future generations and young architects.
Enfoca esta plática en particular en el objetivo específico de la Semana del Hábitat que tiene que ver con las lecciones, estrategias y en sus aprendizajes para nuevas generaciones desde la práctica profesional.
In reflecting on this question, I've kept returning to this works by Cy Twombly, the board series of paintings. These paintings, for me, express a kind of an incompleteness that speaks to kind of a middle ground between disciplines of painting, drawing, and
creativos. Sí, tomo inspiración en esta pintura de Cy Twombly respecto a temas específicos de autoría y del proceso creativo que lleva a generar este tipo de obra.
It's like a language, but it's open to interpretation by the viewer.
Okay. De alguna manera es un idioma, pero está abierto a interpretación. Es un lenguaje muy específico, pero también está abierto a la interpretación.
If we're going to confront the challenges of our generation and of your generation, we need to develop techniques like Twombly's that open our skills and energy to many possibilities. We also have to take risks in ways that might fall short in the near term, but can produce innovation over time.
Okay. Si vamos a tomar, o debemos de tomar en serio los retos que tenemos como la próxima generación, su generación y nuestra generación, debemos empezar a desarrollar las habilidades que permitan este estilo de interpretación, esta forma de interpretar el trabajo.
Hopefully what follows is understood in that spirit. This photo is actually a photo that looks at the Eiffel Tower. When we look at it, we see what's happening in the moment, and we see people running, we see people lining up, but we don't see the tower itself. We don't see the form or the subject of the work. We see its relationship to the social frame that it creates.
Okay. Entonces, las imágenes que vamos a mostrar como fuente de inspiración intenta que se crean a través, o que se entiendan a través de ese marco discursivo. Lo que mostraba esta imagen es formaciones de la plataforma de vista de la Torre Eiffel y que a pesar de que son movimientos aleatorios, generan ciertos patrones de comportamiento.
It's almost like an architectural drawing.
Casi como un dibujo de arquitectura.
So our work is that we've developed a few devices over time, and I focus on architecture and its descriptive representations. The devices that I want to talk about, I'm going to go through quickly, are the idea of the singular, or what we call active form, the idea of the set that is made up of active forms, and the mediating surface that's a compensatory space or a complete space that organizes the forms.
Lo que va a mostrar son proyectos que usan técnicas muy específicas de representación descriptiva y él utiliza dos en particular que se llama las formas activas e independientes y una superficie mediática.
Okay, so that was my conceptual frame. These projects that I'm going to show as I work across the projects work very nimbly across these different devices, and I'm going to show several projects to explore that.
Okay. Los proyectos se pueden entender dentro de esa estructura teórica de los elementos que ya les comentaba y los próximos proyectos que vamos a ver abordan uno o los dos de estos temas y siguen una lógica cronológica, una narrativa cronológica.
Yeah. Started by looking at a site like this in Detroit, a site that was made void by the urban decline of Detroit, that instead of seen as a void, we tried to see as a prepared site.
Okay. Que uno de los primeros proyectos que tuvieron en este contexto urbano en Detroit y el vacío que deja el desgaste urbano de una ciudad como la de Detroit.
So we began to work on it through a series of diagrams that mapped both the kind of formal, both water and sewer lines, but also the kind of hidden form that's the space of the.
Y entonces el mecanismo que utilizaron fue empezar a mapear diferentes aspectos presentes en el sitio y esos eran diagramas que estudiaban diferentes dinámicas contextuales. Y ese es el resultado.
So drawings both a way of seeing, but and a way of knowing, but also a way of projecting.
Es que dibujar o trazar es una manera de documentar, pero también una manera de generar conocimiento.
And through this, we developed something we called a minor plan instead of a master plan to think about this neighborhood in Detroit in which we were working.
Okay, y ahí la estrategia que describas entre el master plan, que es el plan maestro, y el minor plan, que define estrategias muy específicas sobre ese sitio.
And we developed a plan for a series of insertions into the fabric of the neighborhood that could actually take the empty houses and reimagine them as part of the arts institution that we were collaborating with.
Entonces, vacíos que hay entre lotes en este contexto urbano de Detroit y asignarle funciones específicas que eran pedidas o requeridas por el Instituto de Arte con el que estaban colaborando.
Yeah. So these plans are hybrid plans, hybrid drawings that show those interventions. And we actually got the opportunity, we bought with a series of collaborators a house for $500 US, and we tested it with what we called a seed of the plan.
Entonces, tomaron uno de estos lotes y por medio de un presupuesto de $400 proyectaron una intervención muy específica de acuerdo a la lógica del master plan.
Yeah. And so we looked at this typical house, and we wanted to bring light into the house and also create a space that could work as a kind of small theater for the arts group.
Entonces, el caso específico de esta casa, donde tomaron la sección típica de una vivienda existente y empezaron a introducir una intervención que introdujera luz al interior de la vivienda.
And it cut into a small park that we imagine in the house next door that had.
Y entonces, esto es una intervención que conecta parte del tejido urbano dañado intervenciones de un incendio, parece, en los Andes.
Yeah. So this is something we made, with our students and actually built ourselves with our own hands, which we don't do so much anymore, but created this kind of lantern, as you can see here, with a kind of bubble that lets you go up to the rooftop, but also brought light down into the space to the other exhibition spaces.
Entonces, esto fue un proyecto que llevaron a cabo, que trabajaron con sus estudiantes y que lamentablemente ya no es una estrategia muy común en el estudio, pero esto lo hicieron ellos y tuvo también el aspecto del proceso pedagógico detrás.
Yeah. And then here you can see how the void moves through the whole house.
Y esta es una vista de cómo el vacío que corta a lo largo de la casa y de la intervención se ve desde la parte del interior.
In the next year, David Chipperfield invited us to exhibit our work at the Biennale in Venice. And we were not allowed to, in remaking the work, we were not allowed to touch any of the walls of the Arsenale. So we had to reimagine the piece as a freestanding object.
Entonces, el año siguiente, como curador David Chipperfield de la Bienal de Venecia, los invito a su oficina a hacer una intervención, pero no podía tocar las paredes del arsenal de Venecia.
And we had a very short amount of time, and so we built these panels out of a biological resin, fiberglass that was developed for making eco-friendly surfboards.
Y generaron estas paredes, estas superficies a través de resina biológica y una mezcla de fibra de vidrio.
And this is my partner, Rosalind, working on the fiberglass.
En la fotografía se puede ver su socia trabajando en el tratamiento de la fibra de vidrio.
And this is the piece in the Arsenale. It was 23 fiberglass pieces that had a counterweight. It could actually freestand in the space and allows for a kind of like a gathering space. And even, this is our friend Helena, like poking through in the top where you could climb through.
Y entonces esta es la pieza ya construida donde da la descripción del peso de la pieza y una foto con una colaboradora de la oficina.
Yeah. And just like the space in Detroit, it let people move from the gallery floor up into the rafters of the Arsenale. But in this instance, instead of being a lantern that brings light in, it became a kind of bright spot in the otherwise dark galleries. Yeah.
Y justo como en la intervención en Detroit que vimos anterior, una pieza cinética en la que el usuario interactúa con ella, pero a diferencia de la pieza de Detroit, donde era una linterna que emite luz durante la noche, se vuelve al revés una especie de
Instead of a lantern, it's like a bright, colorful object.
Un objeto colorido que emana luz.
Yeah. So this is one of our early obsessions with the sets and the way objects and sets actually play out. Collaboration I did with a school in Richmond, Virginia, very similar to yours. The fashion designers actually sewed the coats for these objects out of fabric, which is what gives them this kind of like very bright color.
Esta es una intervención en la Universidad de Richmond, Virginia, y es un proyecto que trabaja los temas de los objetos y los escenarios, que es una temática también con la que trabaja, y justo como esta escuela que tiene diversas carreras, la Universidad de Virginia tiene diseño de modas, diseño textil, y de la pieza viene de un trabajo con los alumnos de diseño textil.
So we've done a lot of competitions over the years to develop our ideas. Many of them have been unsuccessful so far, but we keep trying. So this is a project in Kaohsiung, Taiwan, which was for a pop music center and a museum. And the organization of the building had to be around a big, that was this of the project.
De alguna manera, los
Music center.
Pop Music Center es un centro de música pop en un... okay, sí.
Yeah, that's enough. So we, sorry. So we, it's not that cool of a slide. So basically we use the program and we use the idea of the moving subject with the diagrams that we imposed like the project in Detroit, to make a diagram that could produce both landscape and building form.
Tiene que ver con la interpretación del programa y cómo
And the old harbor became like a wet square, a wet central square of the city. And you can see the kind of ways in which the diagram starts to control both the flows of traffic and the carving of the forms in the city.
Entonces, el movimiento del usuario en ese diagrama es lo que empieza a darle forma a la geometría y a la forma en la que hay un dominio del espacio público en el proyecto.
And have both a kind of presence in the day, but of course we come alive at night for the pop music.
Y obviamente hay una presencia
From the square back towards the, looking at the ocean.
y lo que hace es darle un giro a la atención de la vista de la plaza al muelle, al puerto.
And so this intersection between the moving subject and the way in which it sculpts the forms is something we explored in other projects. This is a competition we did for a central library using similar formal device.
Esta estrategia o vehículo de utilizar un usuario, el movimiento, mapear y diagramar el movimiento de un usuario, esa es una estrategia que utilizaron en este siguiente proyecto
A central library and museum. Yeah.
Una biblioteca y un museo.
So we were invited to participate in what became a kind of famous competition for young architects in North America that you might have heard about, with architects participating, many architects participating from Mexico and the US in this. But the MoMA in New York PS1 competition, we were invited in the fall of 2017, which was, we were immediately invited right after Donald Trump got elected. Which was very depressing for many of us in the US. That doesn't need to be translated, but you can. And so, yeah. And so we were confronting this wall. If you know the PS1 site, it has this concrete wall, and everybody in the US was talking about, well, not everybody, some people in the US were talking about walls and the problem of walls. And so moments of kind of desperation, we thought, maybe there's another way to actually think about the wall than like something that has to be like a division.
El programa del PS1 MoMA es un programa muy distinguido, la forma en la que se invitan a los participantes a través de un criterio muy riguroso y muchas veces ha indicado el potencial de oficinas jóvenes, que muchas personas que han salido de este programa. Ellos trabajaron esto en 2017 y habla de justo en el momento político en el que Donald Trump es elegido presidente de Estados Unidos y bajo el discurso del muro, intentaron reinterpretar la idea del muro y que tal vez había una manera distinta de ver el muro que en la campaña política se presentó como un medio de separación.
But the project is for a summer party, so it has to be kind of like fun. So anyway, we started this idea of blow up the wall, which came from studying and thinking about how the wall could actually become a space for gathering or a kind of social space on the periphery.
De este proyecto es generar espacios divertidos para un programa de actividades culturales durante el verano. Entonces la idea inicial fue la idea de tal vez inflar el muro y cómo empezar a generar estrategias alrededor de esa idea de inflar el muro.
So we developed these structures that would reach both sides of the wall, made out of fabric. They were anchored into the concrete form, produce these kind of very fat, lovable forms. Fabric.
Okay, de tela y darles cambiarla.
So they would inflate with a pump when people were in the space, and when people were not in the space, they would get kind of wobbly.
Okay, entonces la idea es que había un mecanismo para inflarlas y iban a tener una configuración cuando estuviera lleno de gente y cuando siendo usado las formas
everyone wants us to do interactive design, but we don't really do digital interactive design. So this was our idea of a kind of an interactivity that was very, very bodily, very human.
Menciona que en el discurso académico muchos estaban hablando de diseño interactivo y que esa fue su interpretación de llegar a un diseño interactivo.
And the other interactive, the sand, we're very interested in this kind of story from Robert Smithson around entropy. And there's black sand and white sand, and they run in a circle. They end up with gray sand. But if they run backwards, you never get the black sand and the white sand back again.
Trabajaron con este otro recurso de material de cajas de arena y esta idea teórica de un arquitecto inglés que se llama Robert Smithson con la idea de la entropía. Entonces esta idea de componentes se crea un tercero, pero nunca los puedes llegar a volver a separar a sus partes constituyentes.
So over the summer, you would see the traces of the parties in the sand as it became disturbed by the parties.
Y entonces se podían ver los trazos de las dinámicas de los usuarios impresos en la arena.
Of course, so we lost this competition, but we've been obsessed with doing a project out of fabric since then.
La uso que perdieron, pero desde entonces ha sido una temática recurrente en su oficina, la idea de los textiles como medio de hacer arquitectura.
Okay, so this next project we actually built, this is a project for an amphitheater for 4,000 people and 2 stages on the inside of the building for a smaller shows. This is a rock and roll or pop music venue in Houston, Texas.
Este proyecto sí lo construí para eventos de bandas y eventos musicales.
Yeah. It's very unusual to build a music venue from the ground up that's like going to be cool. Most cool venues are like in like old factory buildings or something.
Es bastante inusual recibir la comisión de construir un lugar para eventos de esta naturaleza. Muchos de los eventos se llevan a cabo en lugares reapropiados con otras funciones.
So the problem is how to give it a kind of authenticity or a kind of understated quality where individuals, as they celebrate there, can give their own value to the place and it can develop its own authenticity.
Entonces el reto es cómo generar autenticidad y darle identidad y hacer que los usuarios y la gente que va a los eventos le puedan imprimir el sello característico y auténtico del evento.
So we wanted to spare and create a kind of flexibility. So there's lots of different configurations that the different bands, you could be a band that's just starting out, maybe you have one with your friends, you could play there in the very small stage, but then when you're slightly more famous, you can play in the bigger stage, and then when you're like, I don't know, when you're like Sting or somebody that's cool to you, you could play in the big space outside.
intensificar el intercambio entre uno y otro, donde tienes un escenario para superestrellas y gente muchísimo más famosa.
So I'll just go through some of the slides, and you can see the kind of grandness but simpleness of the entry. And this is as the project turns towards the amphitheater and this kind of large-scale furniture that we built for the outdoor theater. And this is the outdoor amphitheater space that faces the downtown of the city and the bayou. And of course, this is a project that really comes alive at night, and it's the atmospherics of the space and this sign that we designed for the corner that's really become to define this edge of Houston. Yeah. And even this kind of almost blankness on the facade is something that was intentional. So it could have a character almost like a kind of iceberg in the city. I need a new photo. It's covered with graffiti in a very cool way. Yeah. This is the interior.
el interior.
So the next project I want to show is a project that circulated quite a lot, and you might have seen images. It's a gallery for an organization called TransArt, which is curated by a Venezuelan American that primarily supports the showing of Latina and Latinx arts in Houston, near the Manil collection.
El siguiente es un proyecto para la Galería Transart, que es una institución venezolano-americana que apoya muchos artistas latinos y está muy cerca de la colección Manil, que es el proyecto de Renzo Piano.
So this is a gallery also thought at the beginning. It's only about 300 square meters.
Este es un proyecto de solamente 300 metros cuadrados.
And so we thought we could construct it of a series of panels that we would stack up almost like you're building a house out of cards.
Y está construido a través de una serie de paneles y la idea construir como una serie de como un castillo de naipes.
And there's an existing building in the back that we reclad that's a space for artists to actually work in.
Y hay un edificio en la parte trasera que recubrieron con un nuevo tratamiento que es un espacio para artistas.
We wanted to actually make it gold, but our client killed it.
Tenían la intención de que eso fuera un objetivo muy específico, pero al cliente no le gustó.
But you can see the gallery is essentially two cubes with spaces to show art. And in the center, there's a core with a kind of bridge, seminar spaces and meeting spaces, and also a library for art book collection, which is quite extensive.
Entonces, son dos volúmenes. El primero está dedicado exclusivamente a el otro son residencias y también el proyecto tiene una colección, me imagino que libros, bastante grande.
Yeah. So this is the gallery from the outside. You can read these constructed out of steel with these very simple slots.
Y esa es una vista del exterior y cómo esas pequeñas aperturas del estructural con acero.
The building is built entirely out of heavy timber wood, which is very popular right now as a material. And also, it's clad with 11 inches of insulation, so it's like an igloo cooler in terms of keeping the space very cool, and the windows are very small.
Está construido con un material que se llama es madera, heavy timber, o sea, de alta densidad, de pino, y tiene una capa muy gruesa, lo cual lo hace que el edificio tenga una condición de mucha aislamiento térmico en el interior.
And the front gallery gets quite a lot of light. Here you can see the bridge as it cantilevers into the front gallery. This is an elevator. And this is the seminar space that floats between the two gallery spaces.
Muchísima luz natural y vemos detalles de un balcón que está en cantilever y un mecanismo de circulación vertical.
And there's a little nook where the owner can do her writing and her management. And also, this is the one window in the back gallery that has a shade in front so they can darken it for performance.
Y hay un espacio para el dueño o el administrador del proyecto, que es un espacio de trabajo privado, y la ventana que tiene control de intensidad de luz.
And a small.
Y una cocina pequeña para eventos.
And we collaborated with artists to make spaces that were made out of plaster that you could inhabit like inside of an eggshell.
Y ahí también trabajaron a través de colaboraciones con artistas a través del tratamiento interior de yeso, el tratamiento interior con artistas.
And this is a picture of the project in the context. We thought about this project originally, and this is how we were learning from our work, as being something that we would actually work out in Rhino and then fabricate with machines. But when we provided the drawings to the contractors, they actually just took a beamer and they projected the drawings of our windows on the wall, and they just traced them on the wall with their pencils. And so even though it looks very complicated, it was made pretty much by hand. Yeah.
Ese es el proyecto en el contexto urbano y tenían la intención de trabajarlo, hacer una traducción literal desde el modelo de Rhino, el modelo de 3 dimensiones digital de Rhino. Pero en el momento que empezaron a trabajar con el contratista, llegó en el sitio y empezó a hacer trazos casi a mano. Y entonces lo que dice Troy es que hay un proceso muy tradicional respecto a la construcción.
Yeah, and there's details like this corner that wouldn't be possible if we hadn't done it that way, actually.
Y hay algunos detalles que no hubieran sido posibles de no haberse hecho de esa manera.
And you can see the context, which is quite a little bit rough.
Y pueden ver que el contexto tal vez es un poco no tan atractivo.
Okay. This project I'm going to talk about very quickly, this is another fabric project that we did in Houston, an idea to make a kind of lantern or a marker for a bridge that goes over the streets in Houston. And we had a big space to fill in an existing building.
Este es otro proyecto que está basado en la idea del textil o de la tela. De nuevo es la intención de crear una linterna o una especie de símbolo ícono en el contexto urbano y es una intervención en el interior de un edificio.
Yeah, and the owners called the project a rotunda, but there was nothing like a rotunda about it. So we know about how to make rotundas as architects. So we took the idea of a circle inscribed in a ellipse because the existing building was an ellipse, and we designed a kind of a curtain that would twist and make a kind of form that would show the kind of collision of the people that move through this space in this area.
Okay, y los dueños del proyecto, los clientes, empezaron a llamarle la rotonda, pero en realidad dice que no tiene nada respecto a una rotonda. La forma en realidad es una elipse y el acercamiento es una especie de piel o de cortina alrededor de esa área.
Yeah, and so I'm just going to show some images of this project. This is the project that is on the first slide. So you can see how it basically, from that simple move, a lot of complexity begins to unravel in terms of how you look across it, how you look through it, how you move around it.
Vamos a ver son imágenes de cómo las diferentes vistas interactúan con la configuración formal de esa tela que está rodeando el espacio.
And we wrapped it with a kind of pattern of the fabric, which was printed like marble, because it's a rotunda.
Y entonces tienen un cierto gesto de imprimir una textura de mármol por la referencia de romana o clásica.
And so at night, it would be lit in one way, and in the day, it would have a different kind of light.
Entonces, durante la noche tendría una cierta iluminación muy específica que emana del interior y durante el día tendría otro tipo de iluminación.
And this is a model that shows the street and the presence as you approach it from the alley.
Y son imágenes de la perspectiva de acercándose al proyecto y desde el interior.
We lost to actually a great Mexican firm that you know called Prada. And so we were finalists with Productura and Deborah Burke and Olsen Kundig on the Houston Endowment competition. And we're the only local finalists, but this speaks a bit to some of our environmental interest. So this project was for a foundation in Houston that gives away money.
Es un concurso también que perdieron, porque es una fundación que regala dinero. Y entonces, lamentablemente perdieron el concurso y quien ganó fue una oficina mexicana que se llama Productora, que lo conocen. Y el cliente se llama el Houston, the name of the project is Houston.
The Houston Endowment. The product was great, but this was our version.
El edificio de Productora que acaba de abrir y el proyecto se llama Houston Endowment.
Yeah. So it was a building that was meant to create a kind of community for this organization. So we went back to our diagrams and we looked at what we described as a series of knots between all of the different people that would want to come and interact in the building.
Okay. La intención principal fue generar interacciones que crearan el sentido de comunidad y entonces el primer acercamiento tiene que ver con estos nudos de circulación.
And so this is diagramming the difference between visitors on the weekday or board meetings that might happen in the evening or different kinds of public events.
Estos son diagramas que están rastreando, documentando circulaciones de diferentes tipos de usuarios.
So the project was organized around a large atrium, the adjacent park, And that atrium would become what we called as a kind of mixing chamber.
El proyecto estuvo organizado alrededor de un atrio a lo largo de todo el edificio y le llamaron a este espacio la cámara mezcladora o la que generaba estas mezclas de circulación.
And the project was framed to produce a kind of low carbon footprint to be a concrete frame with slabs out of DLT.
Y la intención fue tener un edificio con una huella de carbono muy baja, con mecanismos de construcción específicos de tratamiento de concreto prefabricado.
And the mixing chamber was a space that we made from reinterpreting their program into something that would create much more a shared space and collaborative space.
Y este espacio central del mixing chamber, de la cámara central, intentaba mezclar diferentes actividades relacionadas con el programa.
And the mixing chamber, you can see here with all the yellow space in the center, the kind of collaborative space, also created a kind of invitation for events to happen from the park.
Y este espacio, el central del mixing chamber, también hacía una conexión directa con el parque, se abría hacia el parque.
And this is a kind of typical floor plate and how it might operate.
Y esta es una planta típica de cómo funciona el edificio.
And this is the kind of mixing chamber. And the mixing chamber was not just a space of gathering, but also a space that allowed us to imagine a very low, which is very difficult in Houston because our weather is not as nice as yours.
Y una de las intenciones de la cámara del mixing chamber era tener un impacto y un uso de energía muy bajo, y lo cual es un objetivo muy difícil de conseguir en Houston por las condiciones climáticas.
But if we could passively cool the mixing chamber and heat the mixing chamber through passive means, that's a huge percentage of the building that we could actually not spend energy on.
Y se dieron cuenta que si podían controlar la temperatura ideal de ese espacio central a través de mecanismos pasivos, podían bajar el consumo de energía de una manera radical y muy contundente.
And so we worked with Solar out of New York and Germany to develop a kind of breathing building where this social space in the middle could breathe, and actually for maybe 80% of the year could not have any AC at all, which is a lot for us in Houston, or a revolution in Houston. Yeah.
Y entonces trabajaron con una compañía que se llama Solar en Nueva York y en Alemania, consiguiendo que este edificio a través de esos mecanismos pudiera proyectarse para no consumir cero energía.
Yeah. And of course, this might be familiar to you because Houston is also a kind of Latin American city, but Houston is full of these kinds of screen walls that are made of masonry. And so we had an idea for the facade that we could use these kind of screen walls to produce a kind of facade that you could tune to the different conditions of light, but would also reflect the kind of texture of the trees that I showed in the first slide.
Y el acercamiento a la piel, donde de hecho lo que dijo fue que es una ciudad latina, y la conexión histórica con el uso de ladrillo y de albañilería hacían esta conexión visual con los patrones de plantas y árboles del contexto.
Yeah. And so this is a system of modules that we developed so you could tune the facade over time for both use and.
Este es un sistema modular en donde la fachada puede tener cierta interacción en la configuración, tanto para la apariencia como para el consumo de energía.
And this is the final building, a kind of light cloud in the park. Yeah.
Imagen de la versión final del proyecto vista desde el parque.
Yeah. This project is something I'm going to show that I haven't shown any slides of the finished product yet, so I'm going to share them with you now. We're finishing, but it came out of an idea that we've been obsessed with for a long time. My partners, we did a lot of work looking at different typologies that could work on a hillside for a hostel in Alishan, Taiwan, when our practice was started. And so the idea was that there's a line, and as you manipulate along the line, up the hill and down the hill, you're actually making space, very much like some of the competitions.
Este es un proyecto que trata una temática que ha sido de recurrente interés en su oficina. Su socia es taiwanesa, entonces las pendientes utilizaron este recurso en el que una línea trazada a lo largo de una pendiente genera espacio.
So we got an opportunity to design a house for an anthropologist and his partner, who they wanted a house in the mountains of Virginia that they could eventually turn into a writing retreat.
Y este proyecto, que fue una comisión directa venía de una antropóloga y de un escritor de teatro, donde poder tiro para poder escribir.
So we turned to this idea of a project along a line on a very steep hillside. And this project is based on a 120-foot long hallway that follows the contour of the land. With the programs that are more public or want to engage more openness towards the downhill side, parts of the program that are more enclosed to the uphill side and more intimate.
Y el acercamiento es que estudiaron las curvas de nivel y la pendiente, y los espacios con programa mucho más públicos están intencionalmente dirigidos hacia el área con mayor pendiente, y los usos más privados hacia el área más plana.
And you can see all the way through this house from one side to the other. The other thing about this house is the client was very interested in engaging the landscape and gardening. The house were meant to engage the landscape in a way that you could have different gardens, like a vegetable garden or a rock garden, or in different aspects of the gaps in the house.
Y habla de que las especies de dedos que se desprenden de esta línea conductora generan como especies de espacios internos, y uno de los clientes es aficionado a la jardinería.
And so here's the section through the house, which is actually constructed, again, through thinking of these simple pods or forms and connecting them together with a roof. It's actually a very simple house. It's made out of 2x4 construction, like American-style wood framing, and very simple because the project did not have a very big budget. And so because there's so much envelope, we had to build it very cheaply.
Este es un proyecto que está sustentado en un sistema constructivo muy típico, que es un sistema de marcos rígidos de madera de 2x4, y tenían que controlar el costo porque era un presupuesto muy bajo.
So again, like the gallery in Houston, a lot of people, when they see these drawings or see these models, think that this is a very complicated roof that you would have to build with Rhino. But actually, there's many, many straights, and the only curved part of the roof is just right at the ridge. So there's a double ridge beam that's very easily just curved at the top, and then because it hits the side of the building at an angle, it produces this kind of undulation in the landscape.
Ejemplo de cómo inicialmente pensaban que esto iba a ser una traducción literal desde el modelo digital de Rhino, y una vez que empezaron a estudiar los procesos constructivos se dieron cuenta que eran simplemente marcos que al pasar de un extremo a otro había una conexión curva, y es lo que le da la apariencia curva a las cubiertas.
And we were very interested in these pods or these forms actually connecting across the gardens and across the outdoor areas, so you can see from outside to inside as a kind of framing.
Y les interesa mucho esta idea de cómo los espacios pueden generar esta dinámica de interior, exterior, interior, exterior.
But also every form has three sides, and three sides to the view and to the landscape.
Y al mismo tiempo, toda la geometría tiene tres lados, los cuales se abren hacia la vista del paisaje.
And so this is the house. We just took photos of it last May. And you can see this is the landscape that it's in. It's very green, even for somebody from Houston. And this is the house constructed. It's a simple metal roof. We actually built the facade out of the same kind of facade that you would build like a gas station or a convenience store. It's an EFIS facade.
Estas son fotos muy recientes tomadas en mayo del proyecto ya construido en el contexto natural del paisaje. Es un sistema muy convencional, sobre todo hablando de la configuración de la cubierta.
And this is the interior. This is the 120-foot long hallway that organizes the house. And you can see the ceiling on the inside has the same kind of undulation as the outside. And you can see the presence that the folding of the curved walls has in the space.
La imagen de la izquierda es el corredor que conecta todos los espacios, y la imagen de la derecha es un detalle de cómo los muros se curvean para doblar el espacio.
And this is the effect of looking across from the living room through the kitchen to the bedroom, or from the bedroom to the kitchen to the living room.
Y este es el efecto de mirar a través de los espacios desde la cocina y esa conexión visual.
Or out to the view of the landscape.
O hacia el paisaje, la vista hacia el paisaje.
And this is the landscape view from the kitchen.
El paisaje es desde la cocina.
In the bedroom. Oops.
La habitación principal.
Going in, and the house now sits as a kind of object in the meadow, and the gardens are being planted.
Y entonces, esta es una vista que describe cómo se asienta dentro del paisaje de la colina y cómo poco a poco los para crecer y convertirse parte de ese paisaje.
And the roof has a kind of echo of the mountains that surround it.
Y el techo se convierte en una especie de eco de la delineación de las montañas cercanas.
And the inside, there are these, in the work that was done very simply out of drywall that created almost sculptural form, almost like a Kirchwitter's Merzbau or something. The Merzbau. It's a Kirchwitter's installation. It's a kind of very formal installation.
Y un detalle de cómo los muros interiores, a través del trabajo y de ese seguimiento con las curvaturas de la cubierta, generan intersecciones que son muy escultóricas con materiales tan simples como muros de
And this is kind of the main entry, looking at the view. So I want to thank you for your time today. I have one more project to show very briefly. I tried to articulate different ways in which maybe my firm has had some success in realizing some projects, but also some of the challenges that even in perhaps what you might consider failing over time.
El próximo proyecto es el último que les voy a mostrar y quiere hacer un énfasis en cómo algunas ideas van madurando con el paso del tiempo.
And so this is a slightly different holiday, but another competition that my firm lost pretty early on was to design a heart for Times Square, which is kind of a silly competition, but nonetheless, we tried it.
Ese es otro concurso que perdieron, una temática un poco ingenua, pero resulta interesante, es un parque en Times Square en Nueva York.
And we had an idea that the heart could animate itself through the kind of movement of the people through the city. And so, you know, just in celebration of Chantolo and holiday, I just want to say thank you, and thank you for having me. Yeah.
Okay. Y le agradecen en el espíritu de Chantolo, el corazón latente y vibrante, y les agradece por su tiempo.
Gracias. Yeah. So we can have a few questions. I tried to move through that with my teammates very clearly, but I'm happy to take a few questions and have you, Kate.
Quien esté interesado en hacer una pregunta, por favor, todavía estamos dispuestos a dedicarle algo de tiempo a las preguntas. Sí, tal vez.
When you're building a build, what's the limit when you're designing or when you're creating a concept for any build respect with the construction restrictions on the US? You know, I think that the most difficult problem, I think, for an architect as you get to be my age, is to maintain my naivete, my optimism and my naivete. It's one thing that I think your generation and your voices like have to bring to the conversation, and I mean that in a very serious way. You have to both confront the limitations, but see the possibility in them at the same time. And it's very difficult when you have done as many projects as I've done, or David has done over the years, to still maintain that kind of optimism and naivete, and it's a very important voice that you all would bring to a firm. So we usually start out with, I would say, games, and some of what I showed you are actually the games that we play with objects, with drawings, with diagrams, to try to show us something different than we already know about the problem. If we already know exactly what we're going to do in Detroit because of all the laws, or exactly what we're going to do on this site in Virginia because of all the constraints, then it's very hard for us to see past those. So we almost play these games to trick ourselves in this moment. But of course, you have to do that that's the craft, I guess, of what we do, is you have to do that in a way that you have confidence that you can answer questions as they come up and solve problems.
La pregunta, si interpreta bien, tiene que ver con regulaciones y cómo giras, cómo abordas un proyecto desde el aspecto conceptual con todas las regulaciones que hay en el contexto norteamericano. La respuesta tiene que ver con siempre hacer un esfuerzo por mantener la ingenuidad, la intuición creativa y el optimismo en un proyecto, y tal vez abordarlo desde la perspectiva de qué le incorporas, qué componente nuevo le puedes incorporar al proyecto para generar, tener soluciones creativas e innovadoras. Y siempre, de alguna manera, empujar creativas que generen una idea original. ¿Alguien más?
Sir.
I wanted to ask you how big of an impact does art subjectivity has on architecture, and how does that affect like your design process, and if you can give us like some advice on how we can use that subjectivity in our framework.
You know, I didn't present this much of my practice, but a big portion of my practice is engaged in projects for the art world. We do a lot of work for the Judd Foundation in Marfa, Texas. We do a lot of work for other places, and so I'm very aware of the parallels between art and architectural practice. I would say the biggest difference for us as architects, which is why we try to develop strategies, as I proposed at the beginning, that are what I call incomplete, that architecture by its nature is very public and requires, and very large, and requires a lot of collaboration. And my friends that are painters, when they sit down in front of a painting, maybe they have one assistant, max, but they make the representation of the painting is the work itself. For us as architects, we make a drawings and we're constantly negotiating with contractors, with clients, with cities, with users. And so that's the project of translation that I described. You have to have a kind of a nimbleness. And I think nimbleness, it's a real attitude in how you make drawings and how you explain things and how you create not an image, like it has to be this perfect image, but a system that you could actually evolve over time as you negotiate with all the different, whether they're the construction problems or whether they're issues of how you negotiate in art practices that do that. But I think for architects, I think is at the core of our practice, that kind of engagement. And I mean, that is the negotiation that we engage in. And it can sometimes feel like a compromise, but then often there's a kind of potential, and you have people that are taking a small idea and larger. I'm doing a project in Houston right now where this is going to be too long for you to translate, but okay, yeah. Yeah.
La pregunta tenía que ver sobre la subjetividad en la arquitectura, y Roy justo habla de que tiene varias comisiones y proyectos a través de la fundación de Donald Judd en Marfa, Texas. Y entonces habla cómo se ha empezado a dar cuenta y ha reflexionado de la arquitectura como un arte que requiere colaboración pública y una comunicación constante con la gente. Y a diferencia del arte, que al final de cuentas requiere solamente una interpretación personal, y muchas veces el trabajo es muchísimo más limitado a grupos pequeños de trabajo. Y lo que encuentra es que el trabajar a través de esa negociación que ocurre a través de la materialización de los proyectos, muchas veces genera potencial que ellos aprovechan. O sea, que muchas veces pareciera que generan cambios o elementos que afectan la idea original, pero muchas veces él lo ve como un potencial que le añade interés al proyecto.
Okay. Any other questions? I was just saying I'm doing a project in Houston where I proposed 2 schemes. It's for a park. One scheme was I knew I could build, very conservative, not very, it was cool, but conservative. One scheme that was ambitious, it has a cantilever that probably shouldn't get built. Oh, I shouldn't, don't record that. But no, it should get built, it should get built. But it was ambitious, and when the clients and the community involved saw it, and so we made it happen. I thought it was going to go the other way in the presentation. So sometimes that collaboration is what I'm saying actually fuels the creative project as well, and people come around and try to fix it. So.
Mencioné el caso de un proyecto muy específico en Houston, precisamente un parque, donde tenía 2 esquemas, uno mucho más tradicional y conservador y el otro mucho más arriesgado y con elementos mucho más interesantes arquitectónicos. Y pensaba que en la presentación todo el mundo iba a apoyar la versión más conservadora, la versión más sencilla. Y dice que esa interacción con la gente, con los clientes, generó precisamente que la decisión se moviera hacia el proyecto más ambicioso y que posiblemente vaya a construirse.
Yes, sir.
Me llamó la atención por qué perdió tantos concursos.
He's wondering why you've lost so many competitions.
Estaban las reglas,
Is it because you broke too many rules, or it's just the way? What's different? What's the difference between this?
I think it does have to do with breaking some rules. My firm, we've worked really hard. There's certain, in the American context, and I know it's in the Mexican context in a different way because I know many great Mexican architects of my generation that I communicate with and have respect for. But there's certain box that's a more safe box that they want you to stay in. And so things like the PS1 competition, they said, we want something colorful and like in the sky, like a canopy. And we didn't give them a canopy because we thought everything had been a canopy ever at that competition. So we did this funny thing with the wall. So we resist certain, like everyone wants things that are very like, we don't do that kind of work. So there's some things like this that I think we've been always trying to find our own way, which is not necessarily the easiest way, but that's my only guess I could say. And then also there's other very good architects that just beat us.
La respuesta es que sí, que es posible que tal vez rompan o no sigan las reglas y que es una pauta que ellos siguen muy seguido, o sea, salirse de las... Y no necesariamente entregar siempre lo que quiere un cliente o lo que pide el programa. En el caso del proyecto del PS1, el programa, y eso es muy cierto, el programa y los requisitos piden específicamente una cubierta. En el caso del proyecto de Troy, él decidió que no iba el proyecto no se iba a tratar de la cubierta, un techo, sino que iba a ser el tratamiento del muro.
Yeah, I mean, Sejima, I was going to just show you which competitions, but, you know, Sana won a competition, Magna won a competition, Productura won a competition, so we lose to pretty good architects.
Quien les ha ganado es la oficina de Castillo Sejima o productor, así que quien les ha ganado ha sido muy buenas oficinas, por lo tanto.
Un poco sobre mucho con el movimiento de las personas, o sea, como la forma que se genera a partir de cómo se desplazan. Entonces, ¿cómo es que ellos lo determinan? Si se apoyan, a lo mejor la pregunta va más hacia los medios en los que se apoyan, si son analógicos o si planean el movimiento de las personas.
So your process has a lot to do with diagramming, with movements and flows. So how's the approach? How do you approach it? Is it through what's the impact on the project?
I see. So my partner and I studied together in the early 2000s at Princeton in a time that the project of the diagram in architecture thematically was a project as a concept. So what we've, in a certain kind of process where you always sort of want to escape the limitations of your own education, a lot of our work takes the problem of the diagram and attempt to disrupt it or break it so that for us, the diagram is more, in speaking to the first two questions, something that's like a prompt or a way into a project. It's not the limitation of the project. And I think that's a transformation for how perhaps the diagram was treated more in the early 21st century as the future, and we see it as more one of the tools that we use as a kind of prompt. In that way, it's not a diagram that's meant to be the absolute meaning of the project necessarily, but it's a way to give us a kind of what we would say in, you know, a kind of what I would call a kind of autonomous way of, or a kind of a way outside of ourselves into a project. Yeah.
De lo que habla es que en efecto el recurso del diagrama está muy presente en su oficina. Él junto con su socia son graduados de la universidad. En esa época el ambiente académico giraba mucho alrededor del trabajo y de la interpretación de los diagramas. Y de lo que habla es que tal vez intencionalmente intentan escapar las limitaciones de su propia educación, abordando unas estrategias distintas, pero seguir trabajando en el tema de los diagramas. Entonces, desde esa perspectiva es tal vez ver ese recurso como un recurso autónomo que les permita la exploración de diferentes narrativas.
So there are many things in the project that could be explained through the diagram. There's many things that happen in the project that escape the diagram, and that's an intentional part of our practice, that moments like this emerge that have nothing to do with the diagram. And I think that's that non-universal understanding of the role of the diagram and a kind of subjectivity to the question of subjectivity that comes out of that, I think is an important understanding for us as in our contemporary moment.
Y dice que sí, que hay algunas partes que se pueden entender desde la interpretación del diagrama, pero hay algunas otras que no, y que precisamente ese aspecto de la interpretación subjetiva, desde un acercamiento mucho más artístico, obviamente es una parte que le interesa y que está presente en su trabajo.
David, no sé si, bueno, la pregunta sería sobre la dinámica del trabajo en un despacho donde son dos socios. Si hay división de tareas o hay consenso a la hora de generar el proyecto.
The dynamics of work in your practice, like there's two partners. So
How do we work together?
How you work together?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I teach at Rice University. My partner is a faculty at MIT in Boston. And, you know, people ask us this question a lot, and I say, and this is a lesson for all of you as well as you think about your future, and it's obvious to us now after COVID, but our practice started in about 2000. Right at the moment that connection across the world became free. Dropbox is practically free. Our cell phone calls are practically free. Our Zoom calls are practically free in the context of a business practice. And so we immediately were able to collaborate in ways that even like if we had started in 2004, we would have not collaborated that way. And so it's endemic in our practice that we work in these mediums and we can share files and we can like get on Zoom calls even before COVID. So that's been the dynamic, like distance-wise. What's more difficult is as a practice grows, and this goes to the idea of how we work with collaboration, and we have more and more employees and collaborators, how we maintain the conversation between the two of us and the conversation with all of the employees that make the work with us over distance. It's one reason why I think it's helpful in these moments to clarify some of the principles or ideas that we think are important, and we're both able to do that, have space for that quite a lot because we both teach, and that we can be negotiating that conceptual space. Yeah.
Aula, la respuesta tiene que ver con cómo su oficina empieza en muchos medios de comunicación y prácticamente el intercambio de datos es mucho más sencilla y es prácticamente gratis. Su socia da clases en el MIT en Boston y de lo que habla es cómo esa dinámica no podría ser posible si no fuera por esos mecanismos
David's asking me about the specifics of our creative process. We make a lot of models, as you see in some of the representation. I think models are a very democratic tool in that everyone, this goes to the question of naivete, everyone from an intern to a partner to the person that's hiring you, all are on the same representational playing field and can see the work very clearly. So that's an investment that requires a lot of money, basically, to pay people to build models and investment, which a lot of firms don't do. But we try to make sure that that's part of the process. And then we work a lot through sketching and drawing, which I'm not showing now, but before the diagrams actually become diagrams, that we don't just pull them out of the air. There's a lot of sketching and discussion around how the, and a lot of communication with the client. I would say one thing we've learned from working on some of the work we do, especially Marfa, Texas, with Donald Judd, is, or with his legacy, is to know maybe before you start a project, it's maybe best to like not do anything at first and actually just like think about it for a while and look at it. And in the speed at which like practice is like demanding that we produce things these days, I think that's an important part of our process as well, is the time it takes to actually just discuss and review a project.
Dice que una pieza muy importante de los mecanismos que utilizan es construir maquetas, un mecanismo un poco caro, pero ellos dependen mucho de esas formas de representación como parte del diseño, el proceso creativo. Muchos de estos diagramas empiezan simplemente como bocetos y se trabajan y se pulen hasta que se pueden convertir en elementos de presentación, pero funcionan de manera, digamos, creativa, o sea, metodológica. Y dice que muchas veces, sobre todo en la experiencia que tienen en los proyectos con la fundación de Donald Judd, muchas veces tal vez lo más importante es pausar un poco y pensar y tener un acercamiento claro antes de empezar a trabajar en el proyecto.
Yeah. Also, I want to make a point for the students to say, we disagree a lot, and the process is very messy. And when you come to a lecture like this, you're seeing endless hours of work of very, very messy things that I'm presenting in a very, very clean way. So have the expectation that it can be a very messy and conversation with many disagreements to produce what seems like a very smooth, literally very smooth process. Yeah. And this is very important for us. Our firm name is two names with a slash in the middle because each of us have our own voice. If you invited Rosalind, which you could do, she would give a very different presentation of this work, and she has her own voice. And I think architects, for me, one thing I cherish about being an architect is the ability to be an independent thinker and to have an independence even in the framework of collaboration. And so I think that's an important lesson too. Yes, sir. He said interior, he said, right? Oh, facade, sorry.
He notado el manejo de la luz en su arquitectura y los remates visuales. En este caso, mirar el suelo, mirar los pasos. La ventana de arriba es para ver los doseles de los árboles del cielo.
Okay. So there's the use of light and views and the specific points that you open, you know, the envelope to specific things outside.
En el caso de la casa de Virginia,
different approach with the Virginia house,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Why the different approaches?
Yeah. So sometimes this project you're looking at now is accused of being kind of a flat project. Like the facade is, even though it has all the sculpture, really conceived of it as a series of panels. I haven't, even though we have many ideas about how to work with three-dimensional form, actually building the imagining has been difficult. And so the Virginia house, I would say, is more three-dimensional in its like imagination of the form than this one. Sorry, there's too many slides. So it's more three-dimensional. It's working more towards our ideal of the three-dimensionality of these kinds of diagrammatic moves. And so because of that, it seemed like the object itself was what relationship between the cracks between the panels. And so I think it, if I can answer it, I think it has something to do with the flat, a site that's in a city that is very compressed by all of the different planning restrictions and trying to produce reality out of that flatness, where this is on an open site. And so the forms themselves are actually more expressive as objects on the site. And so that's a tension that ships here be explored more through form and space rather than through the kind of like more flatness of the facade.
Sí, dice que en realidad esa crítica es muy constante respecto al proyecto de la galería, que se concibió como una serie de paneles planos. La casa de Virginia responde más al contexto natural y sí hay un acercamiento mucho más tridimensional, porque es una especie de objeto que permite expandirse y trabajar mucho ahorita la forma y la geometría. A diferencia de la galería en Houston, que tiene restricciones muy específicas respecto a las limitantes del terreno y está en un contexto urbano que no permite un acercamiento mucho más abierto. Ese es su
And also, a gallery needs a lot of space to hang art. And so there's actually very little there's only like 6 windows in the gallery in Houston, so that there's plenty of room for hanging art. And actually, even though it's a very expressive building, which artists tend to not like in galleries, going there because it's very restrained from the inside how many openings we have. Yeah.
Y dice que también algo que es útil para la galería es toda la superficie y el espacio para exhibir y colgar el arte, que muchas veces eso es muy útil y tiene solamente 6 aperturas. Y aunque muchas veces los artistas prefieren espacios que no tengan tanta expresividad, este es un proyecto muy eficiente precisamente por tanta superficie para colgar y exhibir arte. Me imagino que esta imagen muestra eso.
Also, this speaks to our client. The client that hired us to do this, she knew our work, and she had seen our work in Biennale, and she'd seen our work in the competition, and she asked us to make a project that she thought was like the work that she had seen. So we had much more support from the client in that regard, in terms of she had seen this, and she'd asked us to make something like this. So she was very supportive in that. That's, again, a way in which the collaboration, in that sense, actually propelled the work as much as our individual motivation.
Quien comisionó el proyecto de la galería había visto la intervención de la Bienale y había visto este proyecto y la intención inicial fue pedirles algo que se asemejara a esto. Y entonces él recuenta cómo la relación sí generó un intercambio de ideas que llegó a un producto que se acercaba mucho más a lo que el cliente realmente quería.
Yeah, like this. You have to tell me. Okay, That was very nice. Thank you for having me. Thank you for putting up with my language. I felt awkward about that, but you guys supported me well, so thank you. Yeah.
Agradece y bueno, el tema del, se siente un poco agradecido con haber establecido esta dinámica del intercambio directo en español e inglés.
Thank you. Have fun tonight.